Winter, 1883, Silver Vale, Montana Territory. The wind came howling off the ridge like a wolf that had lost its pack. Snow fell slow but heavy, coating the valley in silence, and the night carried that cold, hollow sound only the lonely ever truly heard. Down in the basin, beside a half-burned campfire, a woman sat shivering beneath a torn wool blanket. Her name was Evelyn Hart, and she hadn't eaten in 2 days. The fire before her was almost gone, just a few trembling embers trying to hold on. She cupped her hands near it, whispering a prayer not to the heavens, but to the little flame itself, as if it might pity her long enough to stay alive. Her fingers were cracked, her lips pale, and her eyes, once bright and soft, were dulled by exhaustion and fear. Her horse had bolted the night before when the storm rolled in. Everything she owned, her satchel, her bread, her mother's locket, went with it. All that was left was the blanket, half soaked with sleet, and the ache in her chest that had followed her since she left Willowbend. The ache had a name: Thomas Avery. The man who'd promised her a new life and then vanished the moment she stepped off the train. She had believed every word. He'd written her letters full of charm and poetry, and when she arrived, the townsfolk whispered before she even reached the inn. Thomas was gone, married, with a wife and 2 children, and Evelyn was a fool in their eyes. She tried to stay, to find work, but the whispers followed like dust in the wind. By the 3rd week, she packed her small bag and walked out into the wilderness, heading nowhere, just away. Now, sitting by the dying fire, she wondered if away might end here. The storm softened after midnight. The snow turned to mist and the moon broke through the clouds like a quiet blessing. Evelyn stared out at the pale hills, her breath fogging in the cold. Then, faintly, she heard hooves. She froze. Her heart jumped. A rider was coming from the east, slow but steady, the sound dull through the snow. She couldn't tell if it was salvation or danger, but either way, she had no strength to run. She stood weakly, clutching her blanket tighter. The rider drew closer, a tall man on a chestnut horse, wrapped in a long duster, his hat low against the wind. When he saw her, he slowed, reining the horse with a firm but gentle pull. "You out here alone, ma'am?" His voice cut through the wind, deep, cautious, but not unkind. Evelyn nodded faintly. "Wasn't supposed to be." He dismounted, boots crunching in the snow. His movements were careful, the kind of careful that comes from living through danger before. "Fire's near gone," he said, glancing at the smoldering ash. "You'll freeze before sunrise." Evelyn tried to speak, but her voice cracked. "I ran out of wood." He knelt without a word, pulling a few dry sticks from his saddlebag, arranging them with the patience of a man who'd built more than one campfire in his life. The sparks caught slow, but steady, and soon the warmth grew. Evelyn felt her fingers again. She watched him, the way the firelight caught the rough stubble on his jaw, the snow melting on his coat. There was something about him, quiet, deliberate, like a man who'd learned to say little because the world rarely listened. When the fire steadied, he looked up. "You got a name?" She hesitated. "Evelyn. Name's Luke Callahan." He nodded once, as if that was enough to say who he was. She studied him a moment. "You from Silver Vale?" He shook his head. "Used to ride for a ranch outside Helena. Been driftin' since." A silence stretched between them, not awkward, but heavy with unspoken things. The fire popped. "You hungry?" he asked. Evelyn's pride wanted to say no. Her stomach betrayed her. He didn't wait for an answer, just reached into his saddlebag and handed her a strip of jerky and a small tin of beans. She stared at it, her hands trembling slightly. "You don't even know me." Luke shrugged. "Don't have to. You're cold and breathin'. That's reason enough." She blinked back tears she didn't expect. "People don't usually see it that way." He poked the fire, his eyes on the flame. "Then they ain't your kind of people." For the first time in days, Evelyn smiled barely, but it was real. The snow eased to a whisper, and the fire's glow painted the night in gold. Luke took off his coat and draped it over her shoulders. Her voice was small, almost breaking. "You'll freeze." He shook his head slowly. "I've been colder." Then his tone softened, the faintest warmth in it now. "Come share my warmth." Ain't right, one person sitting by a dyin' fire alone. Evelyn stared at him, unsure if he was offering comfort or something deeper. But when he sat beside her, just close enough for the heat between them to grow, she understood it wasn't about desire. It was about decency. About one soul refusing to let another fade in the cold. The stars blinked weakly above them. For the first time in weeks, Evelyn's heart didn't feel invisible. And as the fire came back to life, she wondered if maybe, just maybe, the same could happen to her. By the time the first gray light of morning broke over the hills, Evelyn was awake, though she'd hardly slept. The warmth of the fire had long since dimmed, but Luke Callahan was still there, a dark silhouette against the pale glow of dawn, sitting with one arm resting on his knee, hat tilted low, watching the horizon like it might decide their fate. The world was still, except for the faint whistle of the wind across the snow and the quiet breathing of his horse. For a moment, Evelyn thought he'd ridden off during the night like all the rest, the men who promised safety but left when the road grew cold. But then he spoke, his voice low and rough, like gravel turned soft. "Sun's comin' up," he said without turning. "That storm's past. You got somewhere you're headin'." Evelyn pulled the coat tighter around herself. "Nowhere certain." Luke finally turned his head. His eyes were the color of smoke and steady as a man who'd seen too much but still believed in something. "Then nowhere's a dangerous place to aim for, ma'am." She tried to smile, weak but brave. "I reckon I found that out." He stood, stretching his shoulders, and poured what little coffee he had left from his tin pot into a spare cup. "Ain't much, but it'll chase the cold out." Evelyn hesitated before taking it. The warmth bit her hands, and she closed her eyes as it hit her chest, not just heat, but comfort she hadn't felt in weeks. "You ain't from around here," Luke said, half as a question. She shook her head. "Came by train from Missouri. Thought I was comin' to meet someone." He raised an eyebrow. "Thought?" Evelyn looked down, tracing the rim of the cup with her thumb. "He wasn't the man I thought he was." Luke said nothing, and somehow, that silence felt kinder than any pity could have been. He stirred the fire again, his movements slow, thoughtful. "Silver Vale's not far from here. Few good folks there. Widow named May runs the inn. She won't turn away someone who needs help." Evelyn looked toward the horizon, a soft line of gold where the sun was lifting over the frozen valley. "You'll be going that way?" "Wasn't planning to," he said, glancing up at the sky. "But plans change easy when the right kind of trouble crosses your path." She tilted her head. "And what kind am I?" He gave a faint half-smile, the first she'd seen on his face. "The kind of man can't just ride past." Evelyn tried not to blush, but the warmth on her cheeks wasn't just from the coffee. By noon, the snow had softened into slush. Luke saddled his horse, a sturdy chestnut named Red Jack, and helped Evelyn mount behind him. She hesitated, her hands unsure where to rest, until he said softly, "Hold on, ma'am. Roads are rough." As they rode, the air grew easier. The hills rolled wide and white, and the wind smelled faintly of pine and thaw. Evelyn leaned slightly against his back, not out of trust at first, but out of necessity. Yet the longer they rode, the less it felt like she was clinging for survival, and more like she was being carried somewhere safe. They didn't speak for miles, but the silence between them was peaceful. For the first time in weeks, Evelyn's thoughts weren't filled with shame or fear. She found herself watching the way the light caught the snow, or the soft cloud of breath from Red Jack's nostrils. She remembered that the world could still be beautiful. When they reached a ridge overlooking Silver Vale, Luke reined the horse and looked down. The town lay quiet, a handful of wooden buildings nestled along the river, smoke curling from a few chimneys, the sound of a church bell faint in the distance. Evelyn stared, her voice almost a whisper. "It's small." "Small's not always bad," Luke said. "Sometimes small means peace." She nodded. "And sometimes it means everyone knows your business." Luke glanced back at her. "That what drove you out of the last place?" Evelyn swallowed hard. "Rumors. Folks talk. Easier to run than fight lies you can't stop." He nodded, thoughtful. "World's got a long memory for the wrong kind of stories." They rode down slow toward the town. The streets were muddy from the thaw, and folks turned to look. A stranger on horseback carrying a woman wrapped in a man's coat was bound to draw eyes. Evelyn stiffened, lowering her head. Luke noticed. "Don't mind 'em," he said quietly. "They'll look away once they got something else to stare at." They stopped outside a small inn, a weathered sign that read May's Hearth House. A stout woman in her 50s stepped out, wiping her hands on an apron. When she saw Luke, her eyes softened. "Callahan," she said with a smirk. "Ain't seen you in years. Thought the wind finally took you." Luke tipped his hat. "Almost did. May, this here's Evelyn Hart. She needs a place to warm up." May looked Evelyn over, not unkindly, but with the knowing eyes of a woman who'd seen life rough up too many girls. "She'll get one. Come on in, honey." Evelyn slid off the horse with Luke's help. Her legs trembled, but she managed to stand tall. "Thank you," she said quietly. Luke turned to her as May led her inside. "I'll make sure your horse and bag are safe." "You don't have to stay," Evelyn said softly. He gave that same small, unshakable half-smile. "Ain't in the habit of leavin' folks by dyin' fires, remember?" Her lips curved, a fragile spark of warmth breaking through the cold that had lived in her too long. And as she stepped into the glow of the inn, for the first time in a long while, Evelyn Hart stopped shivering. The next morning came soft and slow over Silver Vale, a quiet western town still half asleep beneath the pale shimmer of frost. Evelyn woke to the faint scent of biscuits baking somewhere downstairs, the steady creak of floorboards, and the hum of life beginning again. For a long while, she just lay there under the quilt May had tucked around her, watching the thin sunlight spill through the lace curtains. The bed was small, but it was the first real bed she'd had in weeks, soft enough to make her forget what running felt like. But peace never stayed long for a woman with rumors trailing her. When she stepped downstairs, Luke was already there, sitting by the window with a cup of coffee, hat tilted back, looking like he'd been up for hours. He nodded as she approached, a small flicker of acknowledgement that said more than words. "Morning, Miss Hart," he said, voice low and steady. She smiled faintly. "You make it sound like I belong here." He lifted his eyes. "Maybe you do." May bustled in from the kitchen, setting down 2 plates of biscuits, eggs, and ham. "Eat, both of you. You look like you fought the whole storm yourself." Evelyn gave a quiet thank you. She'd barely taken her first bite before May leaned across the table, voice lowering. "Word's already spread, Luke. Folks are curious who the woman with you is. Some say she's a runaway. Others say worse." Evelyn froze mid-bite. Luke's jaw tightened. "Let 'em talk. I don't answer to small minds." May sighed. "That's noble of you, but you know how this town can be. They don't take kindly to questions without answers." Luke's tone hardened just a bit. "Then maybe they should mind their own." May studied him, then softened. "You've got a good heart, Callahan. Just remember, hearts don't always win in Silver Vale." After May left, silence sat between Luke and Evelyn. She pushed her plate aside, appetite gone. "It's my fault," she whispered. "I should have stayed quiet. Moved on before anyone noticed." Luke shook his head. "You don't run from whispers. You walk right through 'em. Head high." Her eyes met his, searching, unsure. "You make that sound easy." He leaned back. "Ain't easy. But it's right." That afternoon, Evelyn tried to help May around the inn, folding linens, sweeping the floors, anything to stay busy. But she could feel the eyes from outside, through the windows, in the streets, people glancing too long before pretending not to. When she went to fetch water from the well behind the inn, 2 women whispered nearby, their voices sharp as thorns. "Came ridin' in with him yesterday," one said. "Wrapped in his coat like a wife." "Heard she's been on the run since St. Louis," said the other. "Left a man behind, maybe more than one." Evelyn's hands trembled on the bucket. The voices faded when they saw her looking, but the damage was done. She didn't cry. Not this time. She'd done enough crying to fill the whole Silver River. Instead, she carried the bucket inside, silent, her head bowed just enough to hide the storm brewing in her chest. Luke found her later sitting on the back steps, watching the smoke drift from the chimney. "You heard, he said quietly. Evelyn didn't answer. "They'll stop," he said after a pause. "No," she murmured. "They won't. Rumors don't die easy, Luke. They just change names." He sat beside her, elbows resting on his knees. What was the truth, Evelyn? Her lips parted, but for a long moment, no sound came out. Then finally, there was a man, she said. A shopkeeper in Missouri. Kind at first, then cruel when I said no to what he wanted. He told the town I'd been with him, said I was carrying his child. Her voice trembled. I wasn't. But folks don't need proof when they've already made up their minds. Luke said nothing, his jaw working as he looked away toward the hills. Then he said quietly, "You were right to run." She gave a small, bitter laugh. Running makes you look guilty. Then maybe stayin' makes you dead, he replied softly. Their eyes met again, and something unspoken hung between them, not pity, not attraction, but something deeper. Recognition. The way one wounded soul recognizes another. That night, the town gathered at Benton's saloon, the place where all gossip eventually found its voice. Evelyn didn't go, but May heard enough to tell. Luke's name came up too, whispered alongside hers. They called her the stranger in his coat. They called him the fool who took her in. When May told him, Luke just gave a slow exhale. Figures. He found Evelyn by the fire again that evening, same place as the night she'd knocked on his door. Seems you brought trouble with you, she said, half teasing, half afraid. He chuckled low. Guess trouble and I ride the same trail sometimes. Maybe you should have left me where you found me. He turned to her, eyes soft but firm. And let the cold take you? Not my way. She looked at him for a long time, the firelight flickering between them. Why are you doing this, Luke? He leaned closer, voice steady as the crackle of the flames. Because I know what it's like to have folks tear your name apart before they ever learn your truth. And I'm tired of letting them win. For a heartbeat, the world went still. Then Evelyn looked away, whispering, "You can't fight a whole town." He smiled faintly. "Watch me." And that night, while the whispers of Silver Vale moved through the streets like cold wind, two souls sat by the same fire that had once saved one of them, not shivering anymore, but waiting for dawn with something new between them. Not just warmth. Hope. The morning light came thin and gold across the plains, stretching through Silver Vale like a promise the town didn't quite believe in yet. The wind carried the smell of wet dust and wood smoke. Luke Callahan was already saddled up, hat low over his brow, when Evelyn stepped outside the inn, pulling May's shawl close around her shoulders. She had barely slept. Not because of fear, she was used to fear, but because of the ache of belonging that had started to take root. And roots were dangerous things for a woman who'd spent too long running. "You heading out?" she asked, her voice still quiet with sleep. Luke looked over, the corner of his mouth lifting. "Yeah, got some fence lines need mending out near Willow Bend. Figure I'll be back by sundown." Evelyn hesitated. "You go alone?" "Always do," he said. "But there's no reason you can't tag along if you're tired of walls and whispers." The offer caught her off guard. Wouldn't that just make the gossip worse? He shrugged. "Let 'em talk. They already are." There was something about his calm that steadied her. She found herself nodding before she could think better of it. "All right then. I'll come." They rode side by side under the open sky, the land rolling out wide and wild before them, endless brown grass, and the shimmer of distant hills. The trail wound past creeks and cottonwoods, where the last bits of frost clung stubbornly to the shadows. It had been years since Evelyn had ridden like this, not since her father died, back when she'd still believed the world could be kind. Luke didn't say much, but she could feel his presence like a steady rhythm beside her, solid and sure. "Feels strange," she said after a while. "Being out here again." He glanced over. "Strange good or strange bad?" "Good," she admitted softly. "I used to think I'd never see open land again." "You can't keep a heart like yours locked up," he said simply. "Some folks just ain't made for cages." Her eyes softened. "You sound like a man who knows." He gave a small, humorless smile. "Used to work for the marshal's office in Dodge. Saw what happens when good folks get cornered by bad stories. One day, they pinned a shooting on me that wasn't mine. Took my badge, took my name. That's when I came here." Evelyn turned to look at him. "So you ran too?" "Guess I did," he said. "Difference is, I stopped running. By noon they reached Willow Bend, a quiet stretch of land where the fence posts leaned tired against the wind. Luke set to work, driving nails into the rails while Evelyn gathered fallen branches, the silence between them easy now. A hawk circled high overhead. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled, faint, but coming closer. "You ever think of leaving this place?" she asked suddenly. He stopped hammering, looked up at the sky. "Silver Vale's as far as I go. Ain't much, but it's mine. Land, don't judge a man the way people do." She smiled faintly. "Maybe I'll stay then. If the land's kinder than the town." He met her eyes, a long look that carried more than either of them said out loud. Then he nodded once, slow. "You'd fit here. Might even find yourself again." Before she could answer, a voice echoed across the ridge. "Luke Callahan. You out there?" It was Deputy Harlan Reese, a tall man with a temper that ran quicker than the creek after rain. He reined his horse to a stop beside them, eyes flicking to Evelyn, then back to Luke. "Word in town's getting ugly," he said. "Some folks are sayin' you're harborin' a woman with a past, one that don't belong here." Luke's eyes narrowed. "She ain't done nothin' wrong." "Maybe not," Harlan said. "But the folks don't see it that way. They're sayin' if she stays at May's, you'll bring shame on her business." Evelyn's hands tightened around the fence post. "So I'm supposed to just disappear again?" Harlan looked at her, not unkindly. "I'm just tellin' you what's coming. There's talk of asking you to leave town peaceably before it turns mean." Luke stepped forward, his voice calm but cold. "If they got something to say, they can say it to me. She ain't leavin'. Harlan met his gaze a moment longer, then sighed. "I'll tell him that. But don't say I didn't warn you." He tipped his hat and rode off. For a long time, the only sound was the hammer tapping against wood again. Evelyn swallowed hard. "He's right. You don't owe me this, Luke. I'll go before they start trouble." Luke didn't look up. "You go, they win. You stay, they'll learn. I've had my name dragged through dirt before, it grows back stronger." She looked at him, torn between fear and gratitude. "Why do you care so much?" He drove the last nail in, straight and solid, then finally met her eyes. "Because someone once stood up for me when nobody else would. Guess it's my turn now." That night, back in Silver Vale, the storm finally broke. Rain fell in heavy sheets, drumming against the inn's roof while lightning lit up the horizon. Evelyn sat by the window, watching it pour, thinking about all the storms she'd run through before and the strange piece of this one. Downstairs, she heard Luke's voice talking to May, low and steady. Every word sounded like a promise she didn't quite know how to believe in yet. But when he looked up and caught her watching from the stairs, he smiled, a quiet, tired smile that made her feel like the storm outside might not win this time. And for the first time in years, Evelyn Hart believed maybe, just maybe, her name was still worth defending. The rain didn't stop all night. It came in long, heavy sheets, beating against the window panes like an angry memory that refused to fade. By dawn, the sky hung gray and swollen, the ground slick with mud and the smell of damp earth. Silver Vale was quiet, the kind of quiet that comes before a town decides what it's going to do next. Evelyn stood by the window upstairs, watching the water run down the glass in crooked trails. Down below, she could see Luke in his duster, talking to someone outside the general store. His stance was calm, but his shoulders were set hard the way a man stands when he's bracing for trouble. May came in without knocking, carrying a folded blanket. "He's been out there since sunrise," she said softly. "Trying to keep your name from catching fire in a place that loves kindling." Evelyn turned. "You think he can stop it?" May sighed. "You can't stop gossip, dear. You can only outlast it. And that man looks like he's got enough spine to do just that." Evelyn smiled faintly, but there was a sadness behind it. "He shouldn't have to." May gave her arm a gentle squeeze. "Maybe he wants to. Some men need to fix what the world breaks, especially if they know what it feels like to be broken." Later that morning, the saloon's porch filled with murmurs. Townsfolk gathered, farmers, shopkeepers, and the usual handful of talkers who thrived on other people's ruin. Luke stepped into the muddy street, facing them head-on. He didn't shout, didn't puff his chest, just stood tall and steady, the rain dripping off his hat brim. A man named Clyde Harper, one of the loudest tongues in Silver Vale, crossed his arms. "You bringin' strangers into this town again, Callahan? First time you did that, We lost half a herd and a marshal's favor. Luke met his gaze without flinching. This ain't about herdin' or lawmen. It's about decency. Clyde snorted. Decency? That woman's a wanderer. You think she's innocent, fine. But you bring her in, you tie your name to hers. I already did, Luke said simply. A ripple of whispers went through the crowd. Clyde took a step closer. You protecting her 'cause she's helpless? Or 'cause she's yours? The tension snapped like a whip. Luke's jaw flexed, but his tone stayed even. I'm protecting her 'cause she's human. And I won't stand by while folks burn someone with words just 'cause it's easier than a skin the truth. Someone muttered, she's trouble. Luke's eyes hardened. So am I. The silence that followed was sharp. Then Clyde spat in the mud, turned, and walked off. A few others followed, muttering under their breath. But some, not all, but enough, stayed behind, staring at Luke as if they were seeing him for the first time. That was the thing about courage. It didn't always roar. Sometimes it just stood its ground until the wind got tired of pushing. That afternoon, when the storm finally broke, the air smelled new, like the world had been washed clean for one brief, impossible hour. Luke came back to the inn soaked to the bone, and Evelyn met him at the door with a towel and a look that said everything she couldn't yet put into words. You didn't have to face them for me, she said softly. I didn't do it for you, he said, drying his hands. I did it 'cause it needed doing. She looked at him, a faint smile tugging at her lips. You always fight everyone else's battles? Only the ones worth fighting. She hesitated. And what if I told you I might not be worth it? He paused, looking straight at her. Then I'd say you're wrong. As evening fell, they sat together on the porch, watching the last drops fall from the eaves. The sky was painted orange and violet, the kind of sunset that makes even worn-out souls believe in new starts. Evelyn spoke quietly. When I left Missouri, I promised myself I wouldn't need anyone again. But you, she stopped, searching for words. You make it hard to keep that promise. Luke's voice was gentle but certain. Good. Some promises ain't meant to be kept. She turned toward him then, just slightly close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his arm. The silence between them wasn't heavy anymore. It was full. For a long while, neither spoke. The fireflies blinked in the grass, the crickets sang their evening hymn, and somewhere in that stillness, something unspoken began to take root between them, fragile but real. Maybe it wasn't love yet. Maybe it was something older, deeper, two broken hearts recognizing each other under the same wide western sky. And for the first time since the night she'd knocked on his door, Evelyn wasn't shivering. The sun rose slow and pale over Silvervale, washing the muddy streets in a soft gold that made the town almost look peaceful again. But peace in a western town was like smoke. It hung for a moment, beautiful and calm, before something stirred the wind. That morning, Luke saddled his horse early. The creak of the leather and the smell of dust mixed with the faint scent of Evelyn's soap drifting from the open window upstairs. He looked up once, saw the curtain move slightly, and knew she was awake. He had business to tend to, hard business. Rumors had a name now, and that name was Eli Turner. A ranch hand who'd once worked for the Harpers and had a mean streak for stirring trouble when whiskey hit his veins. The story he spread, that Evelyn had run from another man's child, wasn't born from truth. It was born from spite, a cruel twist of words meant to shame a woman who'd turned down his unwanted attention back in Kansas Crossing. Luke had heard enough the day before. Now he was going to put an end to it. Evelyn came downstairs as he was lacing his gloves. You're leaving, she said softly. It wasn't a question. He nodded. There's a man out there who's been using your name for his own filth. I'm gonna make sure he chokes on it. She stepped closer, eyes searching his face. You can't fight everyone who talks, Luke. He smiled faintly, but there was no humor in it. I ain't fightin' everyone. Just the one who started it. She touched his arm. And if he doesn't back down, then he'll fall down. Her hand tightened. Don't lose yourself in this. Luke met her eyes. I already found myself when I chose to stand beside you. For a moment, the world outside that small and didn't exist. Then he tipped his hat and stepped into the rising light. The Broken Lantern Saloon was already half full when Luke walked in. Dust hung in the air, and the piano in the corner played a tune too tired to care who listened. At the far end, Eli Turner leaned against the bar, a lean man with eyes that carried more arrogance than sense. Luke crossed the floor slow, boots thudding against the boards. The crowd felt the tension crawl through the room like a storm rolling over dry land. Conversation stopped. "Eli," Luke said evenly, "you and I need to talk." Turner turned, a grin cutting across his face. "Well, if it ain't the gallant cowboy himself. Heard you took in a fallen angel. Ain't like you to pick up strays." Luke's eyes stayed steady. "You'll stop talking about her." Eli laughed, the sound sharp and careless. "Oh, I'll talk about whatever I please. Ain't my fault she's got secrets worth tellin'. Luke took one slow step closer. "You're not tellin' stories, Turner. You're tellin' lies. And I'm done hearin' 'em." Eli leaned forward, voice dropping low. "You think that woman's pure? You think she didn't bed some man before runnin' here? You're a fool, Callahan." The room went still. Then Luke moved, not with anger, but with the kind of controlled force that comes from a man who's buried enough rage to know exactly how much to use. His fist caught Turner square in the jaw. The man went down hard, crashing into a table. Gasps filled the air. Luke stood over him, breathing steady. "You get up, you spread one more word, and I'll make sure your tongue's the last thing you ever lose." Eli spat blood, glaring up. "You think she'll thank you for this? She'll ruin you, same as she's ruined others." Luke's voice dropped to a low growl. "That woman's done nothing wrong but trust the wrong world. Now get out of Silvervale before it forgets mercy." Turner saw something in Luke's eyes then, something colder than bullets. He stumbled to his feet and left without another word. The saloon doors flapped shut behind him, the wind carrying him away like a whisper that finally died. That evening, Luke returned to the inn. Evelyn was waiting by the porch, hands folded tight. When she saw him, relief flooded her face, but so did worry. "You didn't have to fight him," she said, voice trembling slightly. He shook his head. "Didn't fight him. Just told him the truth in a language he could understand." She looked down. "And what did it cost you?" Luke exhaled slowly. "Nothin', I wasn't willin' to pay." She smiled faintly, then stepped closer, so close that the air between them felt charged, fragile. "You keep fightin' for me, Luke. But one day, I want to stand beside you, not behind you." He studied her face, the strength there, the quiet fire that had survived too much. "Then we'll stand together," he said softly. "And when they look at you, they'll see what I see, a woman who stood tall when the world tried to bury her." For a long moment, neither spoke. The last light of sunset brushed against her hair, turning it to copper. Then she whispered, "You make it sound like I'm worth Savon. Luke smiled. "You were never the one who needed Savon. That night, the rain didn't come. The stars spilled across the sky, endless and clear. Luke sat outside long after she'd gone to bed, the sound of the night settling around him. He thought of how far they'd come, of the storm that had brought her to his door, of the whispers, the looks, the fire that nearly consumed her name. And he thought of how she'd still stood through it all, steady as the wind against the prairie. Somewhere deep down, Luke Callahan knew this wasn't the end. There were still shadows to face and secrets left buried under Silvervale's quiet streets. But for tonight, at least, peace had finally found them. And maybe, just maybe, it would stay. The next morning in Silvervale, the air carried a strange quiet, the kind that sits heavy before something breaks. The town had gone back to its rhythm, wagons rolling, saloon doors creaking, church bell echoing in the far hills. But beneath it all, whispers still traveled. Luke Callahan felt them. He could feel eyes follow him when he walked down Main Street. Some looked with respect, others with doubt. That's how it was in towns like these. Truth didn't spread as fast as gossip, but it always came with a price when it did. At the inn, Evelyn Harper sat by the window, her shawl wrapped tight. The sun was bright outside, but her thoughts were clouded, restless, and heavy. Luke had silenced the loudest rumor, but not the memory that started it. Because somewhere out there, a piece of her past was still alive. That evening, Luke returned from the blacksmith, his hands rough and clothes covered in dust. Evelyn met him at the door, her face pale. "Luke," she began, her voice trembling. "There's something you need to know." He studied her eyes. "You're shaken. What happened?" She stepped aside and pointed toward a folded letter on the table. "That came for me this morning. From Kansas Crossing." He hesitated before picking it up. The handwriting was uneven, rushed. His brow furrowed as he read. "Evelyn, you left before I could tell you the truth. They lied to you, all of them. If you ever wish to clear your name, come to Fort Stillwater. I'll be waiting. Samuel." Luke looked up. "Who's Samuel?" Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Finally, she whispered, "He was the man I was promised to." Before everything fell apart. Luke's jaw tightened. "The one they said was the father?" She nodded. "But he wasn't. He never was. We were supposed to be married, but before the wedding, he disappeared. His brother and the others in that town told everyone I'd been with him. I ran because I thought he'd left me. Now he's saying he didn't." Luke paced slowly, his boots scraping against the wood. "If he's tellin' the truth, then you've been livin' under a lie built by cowards." She swallowed hard. "And if he's not? Then we'll find out together." The next day, they set out for Fort Stillwater, a 2-day ride through broken hills and barren plains. The wind was sharp, carrying the smell of pine and dust. Evelyn rode beside Luke, silent for most of the journey. Every few miles, she'd glance at him, steady, focused, protective. "Luke," she said quietly at one point, "why are you doing this for me?" He didn't answer right away. The reins creaked in his hands. "Because no one should have to carry lies that heavy alone. And because I know what it's like to be judged by ghosts." Her eyes softened. "Your past." He nodded. "Lost a wife once. Folks said it was my fault. I buried her and the truth the same day. Never cared to defend myself after that." She looked at him, voice barely above a whisper. "And now you're defending me." He gave a faint smile. "Maybe it's my turn to do something right." They reached Fort Stillwater by dusk. It wasn't much, just a stretch of buildings around a worn-out post, and a tavern that looked like it had seen more winters than customers. A man stood by the hitching post, tall, thin, with eyes that carried too much sorrow. "Evelyn," he said, voice rough with guilt. She froze. "Samuel." Luke watched quietly, one hand resting on his belt. Samuel stepped forward. "I didn't leave you. My brother lied. Said I ran off, but I was taken by debt collectors and thrown in Stillwater's camp. When I got out, you were gone. And by then, everyone believed his story." Evelyn's breath shook. "Your brother spread the rumors?" He nodded, shame darkening his face. "He wanted the ranch. Wanted you to fall so he could keep it all." Luke's eyes narrowed. "And you're just now deciding to tell her this?" Samuel met his gaze. "I didn't have the chance. I'm tellin' her now because she deserves to stop runnin'. The silence that followed was long and cold. Evelyn's tears glimmered in the fading light. "All this time," she whispered, "I thought I was cursed. Turns out I was just betrayed." Luke stepped closer, his voice steady but soft. "You ain't cursed, Evelyn. You just trusted the wrong men." She turned to him, to the man who had fought for her when the world spat her name. "And the right one stood by me when I least deserved it." That night, they stayed at a small cabin near the fort. Evelyn sat by the fire, staring at the flames. Luke poured coffee into a tin cup and handed it to her. "You could go back now," he said quietly. "You could clear your name." She shook her head. "There's nothing left for me there. The people who mattered already made their choice. And I made mine." Luke tilted his head. "And what's that?" Her eyes met his. "To stop living in other people's stories. And start building mine with a man who gave me back my name." Luke didn't answer right away. He just reached out, brushing his thumb over her hand. The silence between them wasn't empty anymore. It was filled with understanding, with something deeper than words. Outside, the wind howled across the plains, but inside that cabin, warmth and truth finally met. The storm outside had quieted to a whisper, a soft drizzle that brushed against the cabin's wooden roof like the slow ticking of time itself. The fire crackled low, its orange glow painting warm streaks across Evelyn's face. Her eyes reflected the light, soft and searching, as though she were finally seeing herself clearly for the first time in years. Luke Callahan sat across from her, the brim of his hat casting a shadow across his eyes, but his voice, deep, steady, familiar, filled the small space with quiet strength. "You sure about leaving it all behind?" he asked, breaking the silence. Evelyn nodded slowly. "There's nothing for me back in Silvervale, except the ghosts of what people thought I was. I'd rather start over with someone who knows the truth." Luke leaned back, the wood of his chair creaking beneath his weight. "Startin' over's no small thing, Evelyn. Takes more courage than most folks have." She smiled faintly. "I think I borrowed some of yours." He chuckled, low and rough. "Wouldn't be the first time someone called me stubborn instead of brave." Her laughter, soft, genuine, broke the tension like dawn breaking over cold land. The next morning, the two of them rode back towards Silvervale, not to stay, but to set things right. The wind whipped through the valley, carrying the scent of sage and rain-wet dust. When they reached the edge of town, folks turned to stare, whispering as usual, but this time, Evelyn didn't lower her gaze. She dismounted and walked straight into Marshal Dean's office, the lawman who'd once doubted her. Luke followed, his presence like a wall at her back. "Marshal," she said, voice calm but strong, "you got something belonging to me, my name." The old marshal blinked, confused. "Evelyn Harper, you got proof of what you're claiming?" She placed the letter from Samuel on his desk, every word inked in pain and truth. "This letter says it all. My so-called crime was never mine to bear." Luke stepped forward, his gaze sharp. "Her name's been dragged through dirt for too long. Time you made that right." The marshal read in silence, his jaw tightening with each line. "Finally," he sighed. "Seems the town owes you an apology, Miss Harper." Evelyn's lips trembled slightly, but she nodded. "No need for that. Just let the truth live where the lies used to." Outside, the air felt different. The same streets that once burned her with stares now seemed quieter, lighter. People watched from porches and storefronts as she and Luke mounted their horses again, side by side. A few steps away, Martha Diller, the woman who'd spread most of the rumors, stood frozen on the sidewalk, her mouth half open. Evelyn met her gaze for the first time in years. Martha stammered, "Evelyn, Evelyn lifted a hand. "Don't. The Lord and the wind both hear enough talk. I don't need any more." And with that, she turned her horse toward the open plains. By sundown, they stopped near the same riverside clearing where they'd first rested together. The water shimmered gold beneath the fading sky. Evelyn slid off her horse, walking down to the edge, her boots sinking into the soft mud. Luke followed, his hat tilted back, eyes fixed on her silhouette. "You know," he said after a moment, "you're stronger than most men I've ever known." She smiled faintly. "You make it sound like a bad thing." He shook his head. "It's the only thing that's kept me going since I met you." She turned to face him, the sunset lighting her hair like fire. "Then stop riding ahead or behind, Luke Callahan. Ride with me." He stepped closer until the space between them was nothing but a breath and a heartbeat. The air was heavy with something unspoken, something waiting. Luke's voice dropped low. "Evelyn Harper, you sure about this? Life with me ain't simple. It's dust, storms, and a whole lot of fightin' the world." She smiled, her hand brushing his. "I've lived through worse. Besides, I ain't scared of the storm if I know who's ridin' beside me." For the first time in years, Luke let his guard down, the hard lines of his face softening, his eyes glinting with something more than duty. He leaned in, their foreheads almost touching, and whispered, "Then you got yourself a partner." That night, they sat by the campfire again, much like that first night, only this time, she wasn't shivering, and he wasn't just offering warmth. He glanced at her across the flames. "You remember the first night I found you?" She nodded. "I was cold, scared, and half-broken." He smiled faintly. "And now?" "Now," she said softly, "I'm home." The wind moved gently through the grass, carrying the firelight like a slow dance between two souls finally at rest. But as the stars came out, Luke looked toward the horizon, toward the wide dark that still held stories untold. He knew their journey wasn't done. Not in this land. Not ever. "Someday," he said quietly, "folks'll tell your story, the woman who found her strength and the man who believed in her when no one else would." Evelyn smiled. And maybe they'll remember your kindness too. He chuckled. Kindness don't make legends. But maybe love does. She reached over, her hand finding his across the warmth of the fire. Then we'll be both. And under the endless western sky, two weary souls finally rested, not because they had nothing left to fight, but because they'd found someone worth fighting for. Next time, if you ride back this way, you might hear the tale of another heart won under the Texas moon, like the night they laughed at her torn dress, and the cowboy said, "You'll dance with me tonight," or when a wounded woman knocked on his door and he said, "Come warm by my fire." Because in this wide, untamed land, every cowboy's heart carries one story. And every woman like Evelyn makes sure it's worth telling.